Hello, and welcome to Reawaken the Dream, a course for the writer mom or anyone who has to write in little fragments of time because you can't sit down and write in a whole long block of time all at once. We are on lesson 30, our 26th character trait. If you're just tuning in, you might want to start back at one of the earlier ones. We are working on a very practical tool, a tool that will give us the power of living characters through use of a character profile. And what goes on the character profile are all of these character traits that we've been studying. So let's begin with a quick review of the character trait that we covered last week. Last week, our study was transcendence. Transcendence is the quest for something beyond the mortal, a desire to communicate with, encounter God, the universe. You might even call it magic, some might. So it's really the heart's search for the intimate. It's a desire for a relationship that crosses the bounds of mortality. And we said that the victory state, the lost state, is two possible choices. One would be sensing a need for transcendence in one's life and suppressing that need. And the other side would be going for transcendence to a diabolical infinite force on the other side. The victory state is going to be our supercharged hero who receives a mandate from above and executes it with quiet confidence in a higher power. Today, we're going to go to another empathy trait. This one is obedience. Obedience is how our character behaves in an asymmetrical relationship when our character is not the dominant force. Our character is the underdog in the situation. It's going to be part of a new subgroup that we'll call the honor subgroup. We'll leave the rest to the analysis, so let's go ahead and begin with our scenarios. Keith was just really angry with his mom. He decided that she was just the most nagging mom in the world, and he was really angry. His mom was really getting frustrated too. She was complaining to a friend, "Why is it that I have to tell Keith 6 times to take out the trash or it'll never go out the door?" Keith was complaining to his friend, "Why does my mom nag me so much? The more she nags me, the less I want to do it." Obedience. Prim little Jeanette loved to wear skirts and dresses. She would wear cute little ballet flats if her mom would let her, but no, her mom insisted she had to wear sensible shoes to school. But she did let Jeanette pick out ankle socks with lace to reflect her little prim personality. Well, Jeanette hated reading group. They had to sit on the floor. Well, there was a rug. But as far as Jeanette was concerned, it was no better than sitting on the floor. It was dirty and stained. 3 of the stains Jeanette saw happen herself. 2 of them were food. One of them was when Tony got sick. She sat as far away from that stain as she could. She hated reading group, and she really struggled to make herself go sit down on that rug when the teacher called her to reading group. Obedience. Doug wasn't very happy on his job, and he liked to push the limits. When he sat down to work, he could work circles around the other people in the department, and he thought it was high time that he'd been promoted, but it hadn't happened, and he was really getting grumbly. He'd gotten to the point where he would sneak off to the back reaches of the warehouse where he got a good cell signal, and he'd surf the web. He hated punching his time clock, and he had it sort of figured out how many punches he could get away with skipping without his boss having a fit. He was the boss finally just kind of gave up on making Doug punch. As many times as Doug could get away with it, his boss just signed him in. Obedience. Ralph was the produce manager at a giant supermarket that had driven his small mom-and-pop grocery store out of business. He had a little bit of struggle with his authority figure, who was his boss, much younger than he was. Taking orders from his boss was a real challenge for him, but Ralph was starting to get more and more comfortable in his job. You see, he had managed to earn some respect from his boss ever since that incident with the apples. It seems corporate had mandated 2 big displays so that you entered the produce department with apples on your left and apples on your right as you came in. The only problem was locally they'd had a bumper crop of apples, and if anyone wanted apples, there was always someone in the neighborhood who could give them apples. Well, Ralph had presented it respectfully to his boss, but had gotten nowhere. The boss insisted on setting up the display as corporate had managed, and as it turned out, they ended up having to throw away most of the apples. So that earned Ralph a little bit more respect from his boss, and it made a whole lot easier for Ralph to take orders from the fellow. Obedience. The analysis. Obedience is giving respectful and prompt obedience to those who are in rightful authority. And like some other traits that we've discussed, obedience assumes an ideal world where the individual in authority is justly in authority and is executing that authority responsibly and for the good of all. Sadly, we know that abuse of authority is entirely possible. We won't dwell on that in this lesson, but there are many, many stories that are quite possible out of that abuse of authority. The struggle of authority can be illustrated in an animal model where a beta animal comes up to try to take some food, but the alpha animal barks and snarls, and out of respect or fear, the beta animal slinks away from the food. That's respect. But then, when the back is turned of the alpha animal, whoop, swoops in and sneaks some food. Obedience. Obedience is doing the will of the rightful authority. The lost state of obedience is to be slow to respond, slow to give that obedience. It could go so far as being resistant or even subversive of the figure in authority. It could be as mild as grumbling, but not grumbling to the face of the authority figure, because that would be disrespect. More like going off and grumbling. Those are the various lost states of obedience. The victory state of obedience is prompt obedience, doing what was asked promptly, without grumbling, at once. What you get as the reward for prompt obedience is peace and tranquility. Of course, if the authority figure is not a rightful authority, and if our character is in a position to do something about it, then perhaps all that peace and tranquility, we might not think so much as a victory state. But definitionally, this will be the victory state because we always assume a perfect world. Obedience often goes hand in hand with a couple of other traits. Self-control, because the individual has to say, I don't want to, but gets control of himself and says, I'll do it. And it often goes with respect, where the individual is also respectful of the authority figure. But since obedience, self-control, and respect are independent character traits, it's always fun to play with splitting that group up to see what happens if we do get this victory state of obedience, but one or the other of these is often a wing trait, and we'll play with that in just a moment. Obedience is an empathy trait, and like all empathy traits, that means it's only modifier scale. So now we have to say, well, is there an intrinsic factor that's going on with scale, with obedience, like we saw with loyalty, or we saw with honesty, where this you really wouldn't want trustworthiness, where the slightest tinge is produces a great sense of revulsion for the character that we present that for. Our readers aren't going to like that character. But what we find with obedience, that the whole scale is going to be dependent on the story. What's at stake in the obedience is very, very much up for grabs. It is, as we said, a member of the empathy group, that large empathy group that we thought was endless. Well, guess what? This is a member of a little 2-character trait subgroup called the honor subgroup. And the other one of that group we'll get next week, and that completes the empathy group. We are next week 1 character trait away from completing the empathy group. When we do that, then we have 1 more character trait left in the balance group, and we will be all done. So in the coming 2 lessons, we get our last 2 character traits. That leaves us 3 lessons left. And in those 3 lessons, we will cover 3 story elements that almost function like character traits, but are not character traits. And we will talk about those for the last 3 lessons. I'm not going to spoil the surprise. And there is a surprise coming up for right after the last lesson. I have a book coming out. And the book is a summary reference book of all 35 lessons. It's a handy way to quickly look up everything that we've covered in this course, because we're going to start another, I'm not going to call it a course, we're going to start another group of weekly presentations, only these are going to be more for fun and games. We're going to focus very, very heavily on fun, on just using these character traits in a fun way, and you'll want that reference book so that you won't have to go back through 35 videos or 35 PDFs when you want to look up a trait. The course has been completely free up to now. And the book, it's a physical book, so I can't, if I were rich, I'd give it away for free, but I'm not rich, so I'm not going to be able to give it away totally for free. But I will have that price down to just what it costs to print it and what it costs to ship it. And I will be announcing that in the next couple of weeks. You can go to my website now, KathleenSpracklin.com, and sign up for notification when that book is ready. So, as promised, we're going to close this lesson by playing just briefly with the concept of obedience as an anchor trait in this victory state, but self-control or respect as a wing trait. Let's see if we can create a scenario out of the blue to go with those cases. Okay, here's our first one. We have obedience down here as an anchor trait and respect up here as a wing trait. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video and see if you can come up with a scenario. I'll give you a couple of seconds to pause it. Okay, are you back? Did you come up with a scenario for obedience as an anchor trait and respect as a wing trait? Well, there's a real classic biblical story that gives us a comparison of this and this. And it's the story of the two brothers. The father asks the one brother, I want you to go out into the vineyard and work today. And the brother says to the father, no, I won't. But later he thinks better of it and says, yeah, I better go out there and work. And he goes to the vineyard and works. The other son, the father asks him, today I want you to go to the vineyard and work. That son says, yes, Dad, I'm going to go right away. But then he doesn't do it. So obedience is up here. And that is our classic example of how obedience and respect can be split. So we're going to do another one. Another one we're going to keep obedience down here as an anchor trait, and we're going to put self-control as a wing trait. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to hit the pause. Okay, we're back. Did you come up with a scenario to go with obedience as an anchor trait and self-control as a wing trait? I came up with one. We can let it be Keith again. He was, this time he's going to be an obedient boy. His mother says, go up to the room and go clean your room. He marches right up and he starts cleaning his room. His mom's flabbergasted, but he does it. And as he gets going cleaning up his room, pretty soon he's distracted by what he finds in his room, a book, a model airplane, his cell phone. And because he doesn't have self-control, he's off to the races and doing something other than his obedient act. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. We're getting so close to the end. Can you believe it? 30 out of 35. One of the other things we're going to be discussing in those last 3 videos is the third superpower. You might remember way back to the introductory email series where I promised you 3 superpowers if you completed the class. One was the power of connecting threads. That was where you keep your notebook so you don't lose the components of your story. The other one was the power of living characters that we've been working on for week after week after week. And the third superpower, well, I'll remind you of that in our last 3 lessons. I won't remind you right now. You can go look. See you next week. Bye-bye.